Hey guys, there was a time when I got asked this question a lot, and now here I am, years later, answering it a lot, I suppose. I used to get asked all the time, in person, face to face, by email, what I thought about Buddhist meditation, what my own experiences were, and what my advice was for other people. And I'm really answering it now because I'm in a new relationship with a new girlfriend, and just in the last couple of days, we've been talking a lot about the history of Buddhism in general, my own experience as a former scholar of Buddhism, and what my position on these various topics may be. So in this way, in a relaxed, down-to-earth fashion, just recorded another long video with my girlfriend discussing what my position on meditation is and isn't. And it occurs to me that I could make a short video here just discussing how I have in the past directly face-to-face with Buddhists, and of course sometimes by email, debated the issue of meditation. So this is not a hypothetical debate. This is not what would you say as a secular atheist, what would you say as a nihilist if you were to sit down and talk about these things with Buddhists. I have talked about these things with Buddhists. This video is going to summarize a type of conversation and debate that I've had in Thailand, that I've had in Sri Lanka, that I've had in Canada, that I've had with people who describe themselves as secular scholars of Buddhism, people with PhDs, and that I've had with Buddhist monks, wearing the full uniform, wearing the robe, formally preaching Buddhism with no pretense of being secular outsiders to the religion, and of course that I've discussed with lay people in between. In my other video at some more length, I mention the very simple fundamental issue of feeling tingling in your arm if you flex the muscle in your arm. Very simple point, but in contrast to all of the hallowed cultural assumptions, religious assumptions, supernatural assumptions that are added on to altered states of mind, experiences in your mind you might have when meditating that are just a little bit out of the ordinary. I point out first and foremost in these discussions that simply, if you flex the muscles in your arm and hold it, if you just create that tension in your arm until you can't hold it anymore, you just put strain, put stress on those organs in a slightly unfamiliar way, at the end of that process, you get a strange sense of tingling. But I do not add any other meanings onto that. I regard that as meaningless. Is it so surprising that if you put a certain type of unfamiliar strain on your mind, holding a particular thought, holding a particular image, a particular attitude, thinking in a particular way, a particularly focused way, or what have you? There are many, many different types of meditation. Some of them could be described as focusing the mind. Some of them can be described as unfocusing the mind. But in any case, just like it doesn't really matter if you are flexing the arm like this or if you're flexing in another position, just the strain of holding your arm in any position is going to produce tingling of some kind. Your mind is an organ. Your mind is a product of biological evolution. Your mind, naturally left to its own devices, is going to flit from one attitude to another, from one mood to another. It's going to respond to stimuli. And pretty much all forms of Buddhist meditation, you might even extend this to Hindu meditation and other religions, they're based on a notion of constricting the mind, in brief, putting strain and stress on the mind in one of several unfamiliar ways or switching between unfamiliar ways. And yes, that can produce tingling. It can produce unfamiliar sensations caused by that strain itself or caused by the relief at the end of that period of strain. When you relax the mind, when you cease to hold that image in your mind, when you cease to think in that peculiar way. Now again, I mentioned in the other video, a much longer video, sometimes the people I was talking to had really extreme emotional reactions to this. Really extreme. In one case, it was just by email, but I later found out from the person talked to someone I knew, that they wept at that time, and then they wept when telling the intermediary person who got the story to me. They found this really devastating, just this line of inquiry. And indeed, I have my own experience talking to people face to face. We're already at this stage, I think, partly because what I'm saying resonates with the experience these Buddhist practitioners have had. It resonates with their own experience meditating, and partly because the philosophy of Buddhism itself, in terms of its critique of mind and body and so on, that also in some ways prepares them for this skeptical approach to the merely empirical experience of what they've felt and what they've seen while meditating, right? And note, this isn't disputing that they've felt unusual things. I mean, the point is, yes, if you strain the body in a peculiar way, you're going to have peculiar feelings, tingling, what have you. If you strain the mind in a peculiar way, you're then going to have some peculiar feelings. But why are we assigning transcendental significance to them? Why are we assigning magical significance to them? What is the dotted line that connects these unfamiliar sensations with any particular philosophy? The philosophy of Buddhism, the philosophy of Catholicism, or your previous incarnations in a prior life, all the mythology that gets attached to these fleeting sensations that are induced in the mind through these exercises. The second image I've employed in these debates was of a man carrying a heavy stone on his back while walking back and forth in a room. Now again, if you know Buddhism, this image comes pretty close to some imagery we use within Buddhist philosophy, within Buddhist dogmatics, if you like. Now, you may not have this experience as a form of exercise, but if you're carrying a heavy stone on your back, whether you're walking up a hill or walking back and forth, or whatever the scenario is, when you put that stone down, there are remarkable feelings in the human body. Feelings of elation, feelings of release, feelings of liberation, even, on a physical level and also on a mental and emotional level. Putting down a heavy stone that you've been carrying, if you've really had this experience viscerally as well as kind of psychologically, emotionally, it's remarkable what an impact that can have on you. So again, this image is not hypothetical, you know what I mean? This is really empirical experience we're talking about. But if you do that, if you give yourself that exercise, you give yourself that challenge, you decide to carry a heavy stone up the hill, and then you put it down. The moment you put down that stone, you may spring up and you certainly feel very light on your feet. You spring up and you feel elated, you feel joy, you feel liberated from the literal oppression of having this stone in your back. What does that really mean? Again, the issue with the tingling in the arm, I'm not disputing that you feel that way, but I'm challenging you. You've put yourself in this very unnatural situation where in your body and your mind, you're inducing these feelings. And there's a sense in which they're real. You know what I mean? I'm not going to tell you that's an unreal feeling, like many other forms of, athletic exertion. Just mountain climbing, especially, in very, very high altitudes with thin air and so on. All kinds of people actually have, anecdotes of the exhaustion and oxygen deprivation, even inducing hallucinations, but a sense of euphoria, a sense of joy, and so on. You can have all these very strange emotional reactions to just this kind of physical strain put on the body. And again, most of the time when I was speaking to experienced Buddhist practitioners, whether they were lay people or monks, whether they had PhDs and spent their time in university, or if they spent their time literally in a cave in the mountains, whatever their background was, I normally didn't have to spell out the rest of the argument for them. What is the dotted line connecting this physical sense, this mood, this feeling, to the philosophy you claim, to the supernatural cosmology you claim? Yeah? And as I say, a lot of people I talked to had extreme emotional reactions to this, and they recognized the truth of what I was saying, perhaps just because the approach to the issue I was demonstrating was itself aesthetically and structurally so similar to the way that classical Buddhist philosophy itself raises these questions, engages these things. As soon as we're addressing feelings as feelings, all of the pretensions of Buddhist philosophy fall apart. If we're just able to address the outcomes of these meditative methods as feelings, not as spheres. A lot of people will use this kind of fake language, not as another plane of existence, but just as feelings. As soon as you get people to recognize that, then already what they've recognized is they're engaged in an exercise that's no more supernatural than flexing your arm or carrying a rock on your back and forth across the floor. They've engaged in an exercise that is in many ways much more pointless than, for example, practicing mathematics on a chalkboard, with a piece of chalk, or many other exercises we could do that do strain the mind in one way or another. It's a completely abstract, dead-ended, and pointless form of stress and strain that they've put on their minds to no particular end except that exhaustion. A type of exhaustion not so different from carrying the rock back and forth, just so they can have the experience of liberation from that exhaustion when they place that rock down. And I don't even deny the feeling of liberation. I don't deny the feeling of ecstasy they may have. I don't deny the hallucinatory experiences they may have had also. What I insist on is that this liberation in itself is meaningless, and that they have had a set of cultural and religious presuppositions that they try to attach to this experience. And in fact, the experience they've had has nothing more to do with Buddhism than it has to do with Catholicism or communism or any other ideology. The experience fails to validate the ideology, and the ideology itself also fails to provide the experience. It would be as absurd as carrying that stone up a mountain, putting the stone down, then feeling so elated, feeling this rush of energy, vitality, what have you, this joy to be liberated after putting down the stone, and then turning around and worshiping that stone as your God.